minute. The objective of this first presentation is to give an overview of the situation of the cocoa market. Among the participants here today, we have various profiles, I would say. So I will give an overview. So some of you may know all the points I'm going to raise, but I think it's a good point to start the day with basic knowledge on what is the situation of the market and where are we going. And at the end of this presentation, I will also give some perspective on where we think, as ICCO, where we think the market is going. On this first slide, I've compiled a few articles published in the press, which were dealing about the scare of no more chocolate available to us mainly by 2020. 2020 is a very important date in this article. So there's a concentration on 2020. So I've compiled a few articles. The title I've borrowed from another article, the Chocapolypse 2020. So this gives you an overview of what has been in the press in recent months and years. And this has somehow confused the consumers. And we had, at ICCO, we had a lot of phone calls about this issue, asking, well, are we going to deal with that threat? So that's why for us it was quite important to give, to express our view publicly on this matter. So just wondering, how can we have a deficit of 1 million tons in 2020? So I've put some thought about it and thinking, I don't think that can happen. I'm pretty sure it will not happen. In 2019, 2020, there will not be a deficit of 1 million tons for that particular year. So let's be clear, that will not happen. So thinking, well, can we be 100% sure? There may be some cases. So I was thinking about maybe disease reaching West Africa, like witch's broom from Latin America. But even that, I think that you will not have a deficit of 1 million tons that year. So a political crisis in West Africa, the main producing region, even that, I don't think that might lead to a deficit of 1 million tons on that particular year. So maybe the only option would be, I would say, in January 2020 to have something like a meteorite reaching West Africa. So I think we can't say 100% sure, but it's very likely that it will not happen. In that slide, I've put the trend for production and grindings from the 60s up to 2014-15, up to this year. So the blue line is production, and the red line is the demand for cocoa. So you can see that over the years, over the past 50 plus years, both have followed more or less the same trend. So it was an increase of about 2.5% over this period of 50 years. However, you can see that for production it's more variable, more volatile, simply because production is very sensitive to weather conditions. So you can have 1 year large production because weather was adequate for the production, and the following year you have a drop of 20% at global scale of production. So that can happen, and the main variable is weather. Then there are other factors which are very important as well, the spread of pests and disease, but the main factor from 1 year to another year is the weather condition. In that slide, this is you will have the development of cocoa prices since the 70s. The red line is prices for cocoa in current terms, and in the blue line in constant terms. So constant terms is taking into consideration inflation. So at today's price, what would be the price of cocoa in 20 years ago? So if we take into consideration inflation, price will be higher than what is the current price. So the blue line, you can see that the blue line reached a peak, an average of $40,000 in a particular year in the 70s, in 76, 77, I think. And even on the 18th of July 1977, the cocoa price reached a peak of 18,000 US dollars per ton. 18,000 taking into consideration inflation. So the situation of today is we have a price of about 3,300 US dollars per ton. So it was 5-6 times higher in the 70s. So when we say, well, price of cocoa are high now, imagine what it was 40 years ago at 18,000 US dollars per ton. The yellow histograms represent the stocks to grinding ratios. So this is the volume of stocks divided by the demand for cocoa grinding. So this is the best variable to explain prices. Is if stocks compared to demand are low, the price will be high. And you can see that in the 70s, the stocks to grinding ratio, you can read on the right scale, was reached a low at around 20%. And as of today, it's around 40%. So if stocks are to diminish, this will have definitely an impact on prices, as price will rise as a result. So the lower price during this 40 years period was reached in 2000. In November 2000, it reached a level of about 1,000 US dollars per ton in constant terms. So in current terms, it was 700 something US dollars per ton. And this is probably the main reason why we are now concerned about supply. Is during this period, many farmers were discouraged about cocoa farming, and they thought, well, I might do something else than doing cocoa farming because the income generated by this activity is not good enough for me. So very low prices is not a good thing for the cocoa market because that discourages farmers, and this is one of the main explanations of the situation today. On the map on the screen, you have the situation as for cocoa production for the current season, 2014-2015, which is about to end in a few days at the end of this month. So for this year, we estimated that production was reached 4,192,000 tons, and 72% of that production came from Africa, mainly from West Africa. And then you have 18% of the production coming from Latin America and 10% from Asia and Oceania. So this pictures the predominance of Africa has been there for a while. A new development we have seen in recent years is the increase in Latin America and the decline in Asia. So Asia, the Asia share reached at some point 10, 15 years ago a high of 19% of global production, and is now down to 10%. And Latin America, on the contrary, is booming. Production is increasing. As Dr. Anga mentioned in his presentation, there is a very business-oriented approach. More and more large plantation. We will hear about that today, about this large plantation as well. And a good business environment, good research in Latin America. And we can see that the result is that Latin America production is increasing in recent years. And this is what you can see on this chart. So the green line is the production in Africa. The red line is the production in the America, and the purple line in Asia. So production in Africa has been booming since the 80s. A lot of investment plantations were made in the 70s due to the very high price. And 78 is a lot of new plantations. It was a very profitable business at that time. So in Africa, a lot of farmers went to cocoa or expanding their production. And you had the boom in the 80s, 90s in Africa. In America, you can see that it has been increasing, then a decline of production, and now since 5-10 years, a new increase in production. And in Asia, it was seen as a very promising origin for cocoa. And you can see that in the mid-80s, a very strong increase in production in Asia. So you had Malaysia, which was at some point the fourth largest cocoa producing country, booming. So this is the first reason of this increase, the first in the 80s. And then in Malaysia, production started to decline because of cost of labor, because of the country moving upstream, more and more processing and less the agricultural sector declining to some extent. But in parallel, we had Indonesia increasing. So this was compensated by the increase of Indonesia. And now Indonesia is also facing some challenges after a lot of plantation were done now. There is more pressure from pest and disease and competition from other crops as well. So this is a picture of cocoa production for this year. So largest cocoa producing country, Côte d'Ivoire, with almost 1.8 million tons. Then Ghana, 720,000. So we'll have a presentation today about Ghana. There was a significant decline in Ghana this year. We'll hear about that later. And then Indonesia, Ecuador, Brazil, Cameroon, Nigeria. These are the main producing countries. What are the factors explaining productions, and what are the main factors variables in explaining the development in cocoa production? So you have first the business environment, the ease of doing business in a particular country, the taxation, infrastructures, available of labor, and the policy environment. And the second point are the agronomic factors. So the farming system in place, crop diversity, variety of cocoa use, age of trees, level of husbandry, use of inputs, weather condition, and presence of pests and disease. And the third main factor are economic factors. So the price of cocoa beans and cost of inputs mainly. Turning into to demand, grindings of cocoa beans. So 2014-15, grindings were about 4,131,000 tons. Most of the processing is taking place in Europe, Russia, 38%. And then the three other regions of the world are all more or less the same, have all more or less the same share of 20%. So in Asia, Africa, and America. More and more processing is done at origin in cocoa producing countries. So the share of processing taking place in a country where cocoa is produced is 44%. This is increasing over the time. Regional processing trend. So the red line is processing in Europe, the green line in Africa, the blue line in Asia, and the purple line in America. So processing has been increasing in all four regions, stabilizing in the recent years in Europe, and a large increase mainly in Asia and in Africa. So as I mentioned, more and more processing is done at origin where cocoa is produced. This chart shows you the main cocoa processing countries. So the largest one is now Côte d'Ivoire. So this is the first year where we have Côte d'Ivoire as the largest cocoa processing. We've been warning the Dutch that they have to do something because Côte d'Ivoire was catching up, and well, now that happened. Côte d'Ivoire is the largest cocoa producing country and now the largest cocoa processing country with an estimated of 560,000 tons processed in the current year. Second largest is Netherlands, then we have US, Germany, and Indonesia, another country where processing has been very dynamic, a lot of investment made in processing in Indonesia. This chart shows you the balance between supply and demand. So the green histograms are years with a surplus, production surplus, and the red line years with a production deficit. So you can see that, as Dr. Enga mentioned, in the past 10 years, we had as many years of surplus than years of supply deficit. And in the past 2 years, we are more or less a balanced market. So supply and demand were more or less at the same level. What about cocoa consumption? So this is the cocoa consumed by us as consumers, but not the chocolate. Here we're not talking about the chocolate, but the cocoa content in the chocolate consumed at country level. So most of the cocoa is consumed in Europe. So European Union represents 39% of cocoa consumption. Then North America, which is Canada, US, and Mexico, represent 24%. Asia, Oceania, 15%. Latin America, 9%. And other Europe, 10%. This was in 2008-9. So now the picture has slightly changed. European Union is slightly declining, and Asia, Oceania slightly increasing, and also Africa, you can see Africa increasing. So this has, we start to see a little bit of this change. And next chart. This is a change in cocoa consumption over the past 5 years. You can see that cocoa consumption increased most in percentage in Asia. So 51% of cocoa consumption increase in Asia, the emerging Asia, so not including Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. So this is where most of the increase is coming. When we look at emerging countries and developing countries, 2/3 of the increase in cocoa consumption came from this market, and the traditional market now contributed by only 1/3 of the increase in the past 5 years. So the traditional market are still the main market for cocoa consumption, but most of the increase is coming from the emerging markets. What about China and India? We've been talking a lot about China and India, and maybe in 2020 they will eat all our chocolate. So that's, we look a little bit about the data, and we can see that currently they represent about 3-4% of cocoa consumption, both countries together, about 3%. And indeed, there is a very strong growth in these two markets. This is the most dynamic market in cocoa consumption. And in 4 years' time, we expect this increase. These two markets represent over 4% of the global market. So a strong growth, but still they are not eating all the cocoa that exists in the world. So we're not there yet. This is the last chart. So in that chart, we have you can see the forecast for the next 5 years. So from 2014-15, where we have more or less a balanced market, 2014-15. So the blue line is demand, grindings of cocoa beans, and the red line is production. So you can see that we expect this is done. We have an economic model where we model the demand and the supply and the price of cocoa. And our model shows that indeed there is an issue with supply, and that we expect supply to be not to meet the demand in the next 5 years. But you can also see that supply is reacting, so it's catching up on demand. This is simply due to the price, because price is going to increase to some extent, and more and more, and cocoa farming will be more and more attractive business opportunity. Thank you.